Hi there, everyone. Scott and Lars back with another Apothecary Diaries review and analysis brought to you by Camille's Harem. Not just a podcast for novice writers by novice writers, but also a YouTube channel by novice writers for novice writers. Because writing is an adventure, it's more fun with friends, and sometimes those writing adventures involve really serious psychedelic rashes.
Yeah, more than just psychedelic. This is like life-altering if you somehow survive it. But that's getting ahead of ourselves. Let's get into what really happened this episode.
But real quick, actually, before we dive into that, just a reminder, there are going to be frogs hidden throughout this video. The first person to comment with the correct number of frogs hidden in this video will get to have their own hand-drawn illustrated frog made by Camille herself. Boop, boop, boop. As you can see, here are our previous winners. So make sure that you comment with the correct number of frogs, be the first person to do so, and win yourself a frog.
Speaking of frogs, did you see the frog in the episode?
No, I totally
There
missed
was
the
an
frog.
actual frog that showed up in the middle of the episode, and I'm like, they're foreshadowing in the show. I'm so excited.
Okay, that frog is going to be one of the frogs to be counted. It
Okay.
will be in there.
It was just a little like side scene, but it was like a full-on frog hopping out of this like bush or something, and just like they're foreshadowing.
They're foreshadowing the frog. If you know, you know. If you don't know, there will be surprises with frogs.
Which it should be this season from everything I've come to understand. So look forward to it.
All right, so let's dive into the events of this particular episode. So this episode really takes us back to Detective Maomao, with the events of the previous episode surrounding the caravan, the potential dangers to Lady Gyokyo because she's pregnant. It seems as though someone is targeting the children of the harem once again. We see that Gyokyo is playing the perfect part to distract anyone from the potential that she is pregnant. So, as Maomao observes, as she's having a very open tea party with Jinji and Gaoshin, that there is still the chance that someone probably within the rear palace has figured it out. And she's a little bit concerned about that, what that might portend. However, she is completely distracted from that subplot with a brand new subplot, as Jinji says that he needs to speak with her in private. And in private, he says, I need you to find the mushrooms. Yes, there are mushrooms all around the palace, very dangerous mushrooms. People have gotten food poisoning, and we want to make sure that all the concubines and ladies in waiting and servants are absolutely safe, because there was someone who started eating mushrooms. I wonder who. So Maomao takes on the task because that's actually that's kind of up her alley. It's a chance to explore for mushrooms. Also, before I forget entirely, I should bring up that Jinji has also shown to Maomao the plans that they have for creating a vocational school within the rear palace for the women who are there on contract. That's super cool. But Maomao actually goes to the place where they intend to renovate some of the buildings to create this vocational school, and explores and finds a whole vast variety of poisonous, edible, and medicinal fungi. She is absolutely on top of the world with a huge basket of these mushrooms. However, things take an interesting turn. For one thing, she smells some pretty nasty stuff in this northern sector of the rear palace, which is a little bit difficult to explain. She says that there was some potential sewer baggage, which might have led to the smell, but there's other things that haven't yet been explained. She can't quite piece it all together. Well, before she can piece it all together, she's invited to come to this funeral service for one of the middling concubines. We've spent so much time with the four major concubines that the emperor has, his favorites, that we haven't really spent a whole lot of time with all of the other finely dressed, beautiful women within the rear palace. As it turns out, there is quite a selection of middle grade concubines who come from all different walks of life, some of whom the emperor has taken a shine to. He spent a couple of special nights with them, but they're not necessarily his favorite, which is why they've not been elevated to a palace all their own. One of these concubines was a woman that no one in the rear palace really liked. She had a horrible personality. She was abusive. There was even implications that she might have tried to assassinate some of the other women within the court. And this is likely out of jealousy because she was never raised to a higher standing within the harem. So she was just going to take it out on everyone else. Well, the lady has finally passed on, and all these other women are there to say their goodbyes. And Maomao's like, maybe the whole mushroom thing that I was asked on was because Jinji was actually seeing if I might have been the one to poison this woman to get rid of her, because it's suspected that someone within the house of Lady Gyokyo might have been responsible for the untimely demise of this middling concubine. And while she's there, she sees that one of the ladies in waiting has a very weird, almost burn-like rash on her hand that does not look really good. And then another concubine comes in who is just completely disfigured with rashes and weird growths and everything. Her hair is falling out, and she pulls off the funeral cloth and cackles at the dead concubine who looks a lot like her. And just, it's really, really disturbing. And this then leads to Maomao effectively assuming the role, but also kind of being tasked with the role of figuring out what exactly is going on. She works with Gaoshin and a couple of other eunuchs to go looking for other evidence to explain what exactly happened with this woman, because Jinji doesn't believe that she just simply passed away. There had to have been some sort of foul play, and they discover a corpse buried in the garden area, who's been decaying for about a year. And what Maomao suspects is the case, based on the jewelry that they find with the body, is that the real concubine has been dead now for a year. And that it's very likely that something happened, some sort of fight. The ladies in waiting killed her, got rid of her, and then used another woman to pretend to be this concubine. And she's basically been secluded to try to keep up appearances, that way no one would look too closely. And it's been working really, really well until at one of the garden parties, she received a hairpin from one of the court officials who fell madly in love with her. She wants to get married. It's her chance to get out of the rear palace, and that would then reveal the truth of what has happened. And so there's a very good chance that the other ladies in waiting then murdered her as well and tried to cover up the initial death of this other concubine. So that's the ominous note that we are kind of left with, as Maomao explains that this might have been the case. Who really knows if that's exactly what happened? All of her amazing mushrooms have been confiscated by Jinji and Gaoshin, and we are left to wonder what will be the fate of all of these women going forward.
Very well said. Oh, man. And there's so much going on. We got a really good look of like how big the rear palace actually is, and to the point that there's areas of this rear palace that aren't taken care of that well. Like there's full-on forested areas that aren't touched normally by even the like caretaking staff. So who knows what's hidden like within the rear palace. There's all sorts of areas that you can't guarantee what you're gonna find, and which is a bit of foreshadowing, I know, because that is going to tie into some stuff that's going to happen in the near future in the story. So just pay attention to that.
Yeah, and just in terms of like again the size and the space. One of the things I do like about this little bit of world building is that immediately I know there are going to be people who are going to say, Well, that's just dumb. Like, why is there an area like this that's not as well taken care of? And why would no one have known about any of this stuff? This actually is explained if you're paying attention to the dialogue between Maomao and Jinju in regards to the potential school. You learn how the girls and the women actually gather together at different points within the rear palace, particularly to the south. That's where all of the socializing goes down. And for these women, for whom like it's all about posture, positioning, popularity, how close you are to the emperor, how much power you have to get your chores done in order to fulfill your contract if you're one of the servants. There's a lot happening. So why would you, in that situation, leave to go to another part of the rear palace where no one's going to be hanging out? Like, that's just people would not do that in this particular environment, in this particular society. And so it does actually create a situation where there's a part of the palace that might not be as well guarded or as well kept, where then you have that potential for secret rendezvous, to do things that are a little untoward, to hide secrets and the likes. And when we had the chance to go to Japan and we went to one of the castles with its massive grounds, I mean, yeah, you've got tourists running around all over the place, but there were corners of this palace compound where there weren't many people who went there, and you could see that even though it's all well kept and everything, that you could see that traffic hadn't trampled stuff down, where the road wasn't quite as well worn. These things naturally do happen, and I like that. This is not for plot contrivances. This is actual good world building.
Mm-hmm. And I love how it's establishing its own world. Because, like, if you do a bit of research on this, it's based off of Imperial China and it could be anywhere from, like, the year 600 to the year 1800. Like, we don't know we don't have a specific timeline that this story fits in, because there's stuff being introduced that, like, it's very reminiscent of like the Tang dynasty or the Ming dynasty, which are like almost a good like 800 years apart. So like there's no way to pinpoint what it is. All we know is it's based off of Imperial China and it's establishing its own story, which I'm really enjoying.
This is the freedom of historical fiction.
Yes.
You pull in elements of real history and you make it feel real. People who know their stuff are going to recognize this and be enamored with it. Mm-hmm. And if you then tell a good story that fits with what they know but is different, most people will give it a pass and love what you have to say and not be like, well, that's incorrect.
Well, actually, there's frogs in this. But yeah, I'm loving like the amount of effort to like throw in all of these different things. Cause like I was doing some research earlier today and like stuff like this was happening in the actual like Imperial Harem in that rear palace area in real life. And so like there's all sorts of like conniving and poisoning and like plans to outdo other members of the harem to try and impress the emperor. And like it's not as isolated as people realize, because like you've got people from outside of it influencing stuff through the members of the harem. And so it's really it's like a macrocosm, one of those of like what's really going on in the country as a whole. And so you're able to see like political movements that happen like clear on the other side of the country happening just in that rear palace.
There are real power plays that are happening throughout the rear palace.
Right.
And it's not just all centered around the four main concubines. Which I like. I liked being able to see that, because that actually answered a question that was kind of lingering in the back of my head. Like, the emperor has all these beautiful women there, but this episode helps to explain that, and it's sad to see how for some women, like, of course this is a big deal. The emperor could choose me. For others, I'm just here because I have to be, because it is a power play, either an economic or a political power play, like the one servant who's pretending to be the concubine. She's not there for any real big reason, and then there's an opportunity for her to fall in love, which is unfortunately taken away from her. And then you've got that one concubine who's just being an absolute awful person and taking advantage of the girls underneath her, abusing them, marring the beauty of other women so that way they won't be recognized by the emperor and take away that opportunity from them. Like, this is all playing out, as you said. It's a microcosm of the greater events of how larger political families and families within various industries, like what was shown to us in the previous season, like the metalworking families, there are power plays involved. There is business involved, and it does get mirrored in its own way by the actions of these important women within the rear palace.
You have no idea how much foreshadowing you just went over that you have no idea about.
Woohoo! Yay!
Anyway, but like, I love how there's an actual sense of realism to it. Like, it actually feels like an actual historic fiction. It's not, because like, I read a lot of fantasy stuff that like is set in a historic fiction setting, and they can be a whole lot of fun. I love those stories, but like, this one actually grounds us in a lot of like the medicinal knowledge and like kind of the politics that are happening. And it's exciting to see. One of the things that like really impressed me this episode is the fungi itself, the mushrooms, specifically the one that like Maomao is being super careful around. I looked this up. It's called the poison fire coral. And it is one of the most messed up mushrooms. If you ever see a mushroom that looks like that you see in the show, get away from it as fast as you can. Yes. This mushroom is probably one of the most poisonous things you could ever get near. Even just touching it is enough to kill you. It will, and like there's a whole list here of things. It's going to target and damage your immune system, your bone marrow, your nervous system, your kidneys, your liver, your skin, your gastric lining, reproductive system, eyes, lung, and heart. And the symptoms sound so bad. So you're going to have really bad stomach pain. You're going to vomit. You're going to have really bad fever. You're going to, like, your skin's going to be all numb. And it will actually start peeling, like with the rash that you get with it. And then to top that all off, your brain's going to shrink. So you're going to have problems with like seeing and movement. Like, you're not going to be able to actually move very well until like you either get over it and you're going to have lasting scars, or you die.
Oh my gosh.
So it is one of the most, like, I had no idea this was a thing. And like, I'm kind of wishing I did, because I lived in Japan for 2 years and saw plenty of mushrooms. Not that I interacted with any of them, but like, just having the knowledge to like know to avoid something like that would be really important.
Well, an interesting thing about how it's depicted in the anime. So the anime gets a lot of the symptoms correct, at least on the lighter end of what could happen to you in the immediate sense of touching it. Though I do love how Maomao shows off the scar that she has from it. Like how it's like she touched it, immediately had to wash it, and it's like, yeah, no, yes, I'm still left with this. It's like, woo! And Jinji then also finds out, like, what else do you have under that bandage? But coming back to how it's depicted, like when I looked at it, I was like, well, that looks really, really interesting. Like, I thought it looked like some weird little orb. That's the way it was animated. When you then showed me the pictures, I was like, my next thought was, that looks like potato runners. Like when you leave a potato for too long in the back, and it starts to grow. That's what it looks like. And it doesn't, and having been around so many potatoes and whatnot, it's like in my life, I'm like, that doesn't look dangerous except for the color. And so you gotta be paying attention, because if you came across this in real life, you might just think it's a really weird, funky little plant. You might be tempted to touch it or to kick it. And no, don't.
Yeah, it's usually one of the like guidelines when it comes to survival is like if something is really colorful out in the wild, it is something you want to avoid. So like you think about like the poison dart frogs and stuff like that. They're super colorful and interesting. That is the last thing you want to touch.
Or you got then the you have the different snakes. You got the coral snake
Mm-hmm.
and which variation of gardener snake is it? That well, one of them is to warn you, I'm going to bite you. The other one is like, please don't mess with me because I might bite you.
Mm-hmm.
The bright reds and yellows.
Isn't that the king snake?
Yeah, it's the king snake. That's what it is. It's the
Yeah.
king snake.
But it just like, but it the story grounds you in that like realistic setting, and like I fully believe in the other mushroom that was the point of the episode, which was the corpse fungus, because like yeah, like mushrooms are really good about breaking down like dead organic material, and a
Mhm.
body like that underground, yeah, it's a good way to point out is like, hey, there's something buried here. So being able to recognize that it's a good tool in Maomao's toolbox.
I like how Jinji and Gaoshin react to the idea of mushrooms being a way of any of these mushrooms potentially being a mushroom that would signal that there's a dead body around there, because they're like, oh, that's just messed up. It's like
Mm-hmm.
you're eating a person if you consume that. And for Maomao, it's more like the medicinal, like what would a mushroom like that actually do to you?
Mm-hmm.
Like, is there any way of using it? For me, who doesn't like eating mushrooms, I'm like, a mushroom is a mushroom is a mushroom.
Oh, I'm the opposite. And I used to be like that, but like you have mushrooms prepared the right way and it like changes the way you see them. But I think because that was a really deep scene, because like you're getting that like, oh, what kind of like medicinal properties would this mushroom have? But like you also kind of have this reverence that like Mau has for it, because like yeah, she does a lot with like helping people get better and with poisons that could kill people, but she also like have has a reverence for it. Is like, yeah, this has a deeper meaning to it, and you can kind of see it in that scene as well. Like it
Mhm.
affects her more than just like the medicinal property, because like normally when she sees something like that she gets super excited and wants to like check it out, like that whole basket of mushrooms that she had in the episode that Gaoshun took away. When she was looking at that one, she's like, this is a deeper meaning behind it for sure.
Yeah, I got it. And it makes sense. It makes sense
Hmm.
because while Mao Mao, while Mao Mao loves poisons, the idea of killing people is
Hmm.
something that she does shy away from, as we've seen, as you see throughout the first season. Like she's a realist. She's not going to
Hmm.
pretend like there's no chance that she might do something wrong and then get beheaded for it. That was even a big point in the first season, having a very serious conversation with Jinji about it. Uh, but uh, but that doesn't mean that she's going to either belittle it, glorify it, and run away from it. But if you're someone who deals in medicine and the real world, death is a very real thing. And rather
Hmm.
than being flippant about it because you understand what it is, there is respect.
Yeah.
There's respect for that. And I like seeing that in a story, because many times it comes across a little jarring to read something like that, because we're so used to our fantasy stories of how many ridiculous numbers of people have we seen die in movies, read die in books, in shows, and
Hmm.
shows all that. Like we're just used to this idea of heroes cutting their way through scores of people. To have a story hit the brakes and say death is real,
Right. Well, there,
and to treat it respectfully, not
hmm
as something to be feared, but respect. Like this is the ultimate end right here.
yeah,
That
and
it that's big.
yeah, and there's another part to that that I was catching on to, because like I mean, the same case in a lot of cultures around the world, but like especially over in Asia, there's certain like interacting with like a dead body is one of those things that like you become unclean in a way by interacting with it. And so like I kind of got the feeling that Maomao's like there's a taboo here she didn't want to cross.
Okay.
I definitely got a bit of that in there too.
That's so interesting. Yeah, because I didn't catch that. But yeah, if you know the culture, then yes, I can see that definitely being something that was subtly hinted at in this episode.
Because like that's something you find out about like if you really look into Japanese culture is that there's a lot of what people call like undesirables, and like nowadays they put a lot of work into like obscuring their family histories and past just to like get rid of any records of those undesirables in their family, like register. This isn't quite to that extent, but this was it. Like I said, there was a reverence there that Maomao had for it.
And I think, and here's another aspect of that reverence, that respect. I really do like how in this episode, Maomao does her best to put off implicating the ladies in waiting for any deaths. Even though the evidence is in front of her, she does not make any accusations until she has all the evidence that she can get. And even then, she's loath to give Jinji what she believes is the case, like what's going on here. She's like, yeah, this is like we get from her thoughts, this is conjecture. I might be wrong about this. And that's why she doesn't want to share it. It's not because she's been trained, don't just go off of conjecture. But also, she, as a woman in the rear palace, knows what these women are going through. And whether justified or not, the things that they did, retribution and justice will be meted out on them. And that's just awful. When you stop to think about it, absolutely because it seems as though everyone else was a victim of the concubine that was causing all the problems, but that doesn't absolve them in the eyes of this society of what has happened.
Well, and it's like you're saying at the start of this recording is there was only really that one person really early on that like won and got out safe. Everybody else is a victim in some form or another.
Princess Fuyo, back in episode 3, she is the one girl that you can point to and say, as far as we know, she has a happy ending. All the other women, it's a mix. It's a mixed bag. Some have bittersweet, some have more sweet bitter endings, or just downright awful endings. And this is one of those episodes where, because again, we know that Maomao isn't the most reliable narrator, because there's only so much that she also knows about anything that's going on, and she kind of disavows herself of whatever is going to happen from this point on. We don't know what will happen to the other women, but if you've been paying attention throughout the show, you can get a hint that it's not going to be that kind, and that's just sad. That's just very, very sad, considering, again, I think that a lot of these women, based off of the information that we were given, were in one way or another victims. It's rough. It's serious. Which at the same time, and maybe this would be my last note for this episode, is that as serious and as heavy as this episode gets, it has great punctuations of humor. Like really good moments that made me chuckle and laugh out loud. And a lot of it did come down to the relationship between Maomao and Jinji. They really play off of each other very well. If it felt awkward at the beginning of the series, I can understand that. But I think at this point, there's now enough history and understanding between the two of these characters that their interactions feel way more natural and allows the humor to roll really well without it feeling forced.
I agree. Yeah.
So with all of that being said, that has been our review and analysis for the Apothecary Diaries, Season 2, Episode 3. Just a quick reminder again, comment with the correct number of frogs, be the first one to do so, and you will win your own illustrated frog. And we would also love to hear what other thoughts and feelings you've had about this show, especially with this episode, because this episode, is a very intense one. There's, I think, a lot of thoughts that people can and should have about the events portrayed within this episode and what it reveals about Maomao, the Rear Palace, or what you think might be getting set up, since Scott's been giving us lots of clues that big things are coming. We want to hear all of that. And in the meantime, if you would like to support the work that we do, if you haven't already subscribed to Camille's Harem, please make sure that you do so, and check out the books that we have published. Links for every single one of them is in the description below. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us on this incredible adventure that we call writing. And until the next video, y'all, watch out for very dangerous bright red mushrooms in the wild. And choose.
Okini.